Well, good morning, everyone. I certainly hope you can hear me and see me. This is a brand new experience for me. I've never done a YouTube live talk before, and this feels awfully peculiar insofar as, essentially for me, I'm talking to myself. I sense, I believe, I have faith that there are people out there looking at me and listening to me. But to a certain extent, this feels a lot like talking to myself. But I certainly hope you can hear and see me. My name is Professor Julian Lam. I'm an associate professor in the Department of English. I'm also the admissions coordinator. And so if you had any questions about undergraduate admissions, any aspect of the admissions process, or indeed what we offer as a department, then feel free to email me, get in touch with me at any point. Just before I talk about interviews, I wanted to talk briefly about some of the other things that are going to occur. Good morning. Thank you, Owen, for responding. That's great. So I think that is proof that I'm seen and heard. Before I talk about interviews, I just wanted briefly to talk about some other things that are going to be occurring on our YouTube channel over the next fortnight. Trista Cheese, what a delightful name. Firstly, on our YouTube channel, you will see that there is already a video about undergraduate admissions, also given by me. There are, well, if you ask me, I think there are probably a few too many videos of me on our YouTube channel, but nevertheless, I'm afraid you're stuck with that. But nevertheless, this video that I've made about undergraduate admissions is an excellent introduction to what our department is about and to why we think the skills that students acquire as English majors will be of use to them. And so I commend that video to you. Now, next week, on the 26th, I'll be offering 2 more videos on YouTube Live. And those videos will be answering very common questions that candidates have when they apply to our department. And so I hope they will be of use to you. That will be on the 26th, so this is next Tuesday at 2:30 and also 3:30. There will also be a kind of a Q&A in those 2 talks. In addition to those 2 talks, we're going to offer a series of mini lectures, around about 4 half-hour lectures on specific themes and issues relating to literature and also relating to applied English linguistics. Now, we are very cognizant of the fact that when students come into our department, that they probably haven't had much experience studying literature, let alone English literature. And they certainly haven't had much experience studying applied English linguistics. And so we want to offer 4 mini lectures, half-hour lectures, that give you a taste, that give you a flavor of what English literary studies and applied English linguistics are like. Now, the first of these mini lectures will be on Friday at 11 o'clock. That will be given by me. Don't worry, not all the talks will be given by me, but the talk on Friday at 11 o'clock will be entitled, "Is Romeo Stupid?" I hope that that's an intriguing enough title for you to join me Friday at 11 to help me answer this question, is Romeo stupid? Now, that talk does not require you to have any understanding of Romeo and Juliet. I will be looking at one of Romeo's speeches. Subsequent talks will include subjects relating to digital linguistics. So how is it that the online use of language is changing English? How do we use English differently online to how we use it differently, perhaps more formally in day-to-day interactions? There will be another mini lecture on one of our most Yes, Romeo is Stupid is going to be live on YouTube. Details, incidentally, for all of these talks will be posted on our YouTube channel, and also on our website, and also on our Facebook page. So in addition to Is Romeo Stupid, we'll have a mini lecture on digital linguistics. There will be another lecture on one of our most popular courses, which is about Marvel superheroes. So do keep an eye out for all of those. Now, one of the unfortunate things, one of the many unfortunate things about the situation that we find ourselves in, is the fact that we need to communicate with each other through these online platforms. And online is never as good as in person. I think you agree. But nevertheless, what we are trying to do is we are trying to increase our online presence, and we're trying to do so to give you as good, as clear an idea of what we're about as we possibly can. But to a certain extent, that also means that you need to check up on what we're offering. So do keep an eye out for those talks. Firstly, an introduction. This talk will be of specific relevance to those of you who are applying to our department, who are thinking about applying to our department. However, there might be some tips, some insights that might be of relevance more broadly to interviewing for universities, or even more broadly to interviewing generally. But I do need to emphasize that the views that I'm articulating are quite specific to our departments. Other departments might have slightly different values, and indeed might have slightly different interviewing styles. So I'm speaking from my own experience. And I'm doing so largely because over the course of my 11, 12 years at CUHK, I must have interviewed hundreds, probably thousands of candidates. And there are some things that candidates do very well, some things that candidates perhaps do not do so well. And so I thought, well, it's high time that I give some of our candidates an idea of those things. If you have any questions about interviews, feel free to write them in the live chat. I will do my best to get around to answering them at the end. If I can't get around to every question at the end, then please feel free to email me. Indeed, if you have any concerns or questions about the admissions process generally, please email me. That's what email is for, and I would be more than happy to respond. One of the things that I'm not going to do over the next half an hour or so is to be prescriptive. In some sense, the last thing that I want to do in this talk on interviews is to say, do that, don't do that. Now, why might that be the case? Well, firstly, if I said to you all, do this, don't do that, then I'm sure you are very dutifully and very obediently going to follow that. And one of the most important things with interviews is that you show yourself. You show what you yourself think. You show your own view of a particular issue, your own view of the world. If I simply said, do that, don't do that, you are simply showing your capacity to follow a rule, to follow an instruction. And really, that's not what an interview should be about. The other reason, and perhaps more profound reason for why I'm not going to be very prescriptive here, is because there are three fundamental criteria by which we are going to be assessing our candidates, and by which yes, Ernest, we will certainly leave this video on our channel, and you will be able to watch it later. But the other reason that I'm not going to be prescriptive is because there are three criteria that we assess fundamentally all candidates, general criteria, but nevertheless clarifying criteria. And each of these criteria require us to ask questions of our candidates through which and in response to which our candidates express what they think. They express their view. Now, if I prescribe to you, if I essentially tell you what to do, then I'm limiting your capacity to articulate what you think. And I don't want to do that. That might short circuit, that might compromise the whole interview process. So, let me articulate firstly these three criteria, substantially by which we assess all of our candidates. The first is this: are a candidate's views, are they mature? Are they thoughtful? Are they true? Are they sophisticated? So we're going to be asking you questions about your views on certain things. Are your views true? Are they thoughtful? Are they the consequence of thoughtful reflection? So that's the first criterion. The second criterion: how well has a candidate articulated their view? Is their view well formulated? Is it clearly expressed? Is it persuasive? Is it engaging? So in a sense, the first of those criteria is to do with substance. What is your view? Second criteria is to do with how well have you articulated that view. It's to do with manner, in a sense. It's to do with expression. The third criterion is, in some sense, the most difficult to explain. But let me try. There are many ways in which I guess I can articulate this criterion. Let me give you a few. Firstly, is a candidate genuinely interested in what our department offers? We want people who are interested in the same things that we're interested in. That makes them great students for us. That will make them an absolute pleasure to teach. Is a candidate genuinely interested in what our department has to offer? Do they care about thinking? Do they care about ideas? And perhaps most importantly of all, do they care about their own learning? One of the wonderful experiences that I have as a teacher is that I get to follow my students through 4 years of their undergraduate life. And one of the things that delights me, perhaps more than anything as a teacher, is to gradually see education become personal for a student. It's when they realize that they are learning not because someone else is telling them to learn, but because they want to learn. They have this desire to learn. And that's when they become a joy to teach. So this third criteria is in some sense to do with teachability. Would I want this candidate in my class? Would I want to teach them? Will they learn from me? Do I have stuff to teach them that they would willingly learn? Now, this final criterion is difficult to define, and it's also very difficult for us to determine. Now, a little bit later, I'll try to articulate some of the ways in which we try to determine that. But before I do, fundamentally, these criteria mean that we need to ask you questions that require you to articulate your view, and that require you to articulate, or rather to use, your judgment. Now, if I simply told you what to do and what not to do, you wouldn't be exercising your judgment. And in some sense, if you remember nothing from this talk, I want you to remember this. The most important thing perhaps to remember is, please do not prepare your answers. Instead, try to prepare your frame of mind. Do not prepare your answers, try to prepare your frame of mind. In some sense, prepared answers tell me that a candidate is unwilling to use their judgment in the moment that we ask them a question. It means that a candidate is unwilling to genuinely respond to a question that we might ask them. Essentially, it's a kind of improv. You're right, Jason. It's a kind of improv. And in a way, that's what we're testing. A candidate's capacity to respond to our questions. So, I said that I wasn't going to do too many do's and don'ts, but I'll do one don't. Please, no prepared answers. It strikes me that prepared answers are especially inappropriate, given that you don't know what the questions are going to be. In fact, I don't know what questions I'm going to ask, and they may well be different for each candidate. I'll get on to questions a little bit in a moment. What I'm going to do for the remainder of this talk is I'm going to articulate 5 questions, 5 broad questions that many of our candidates have, and that perhaps you might be asking yourself. And I will try to articulate what I hope will be clarifying responses to these questions. Indeed, I agree with that final comment there. I would say your name, but I don't think I can pronounce it. So, question number one. What is this presentation for if it's not to articulate do's and don'ts? This presentation hopefully is a prompt for you to prepare your frame of mind. This presentation is also a kind of response to many videos that I have seen on YouTube about interviews and interview technique. And as I was watching some of these videos, I kind of had my head in my hands thinking, oh gosh, I hope none of our candidates are watching this stuff. So that's the first thing, in response to perhaps misinformation that is out there. I want to also highlight certain misconceptions about the interview and about the interview process that you may or perhaps may not have. And thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, I want to put those of you who are going to interview with us at ease. It strikes me that people interview best when they are at ease. I don't want you to be anxious. I don't want you to be nervous. I don't want you to be worried. You will interview best when you're at ease. And in some sense, that is the principal aim of this presentation. Question number 2. What is the interview for? Now, this might seem a silly question to you, but I think it's a fair enough question. Whenever you go in for an interview, including the interview to your universities or your departments, the institution that you're interviewing for will already have a lot of information about you, or at least at some point will gather a lot of information about you, including your CV, your references, perhaps writing samples, DSE marks. We won't have that at the time that we interview you, but we will eventually have them. So given all this information, why have an interview at all? Well, I can only respond in the way that, from the point of view of our department and in the point of view of me personally. You as individuals are more than that information. And in particular, I want to reassure you that we know you are more than just your DSE mark. Now, I say that from the point of view of someone, me, who was never good at exams. I perpetually flunked exams. I was hopeless at them. In fact, that's one of the reasons that led me into English literature, is because English literature increasingly through high school and then through university was not assessed through exams, it was assessed through essays. Essays that you can take home, that you can work on for several weeks, and that's what I really liked. Now, I am, and we are in our department, very cognizant of the fact that exams are not the best way to assess everyone. The reason why we have interviews is because you are more than just your mark. Secondly, the interview gives us the experience of seeing you and hearing you formulate your own ideas. And an exam mark can't tell us that. We want to see it in front of us. Now, in the usual run of events, we would see you do that, as it were, in the flesh, live. This year we have to do that online, but nevertheless, that experience is really important for us. And that's something that an exam mark simply cannot give us. Now, let me speak a little bit more technically and a little bit more specifically about the admissions process. Now, admission into our departments, and I imagine most departments, but I won't speak for them, admission into our department is still largely dependent on your final DSE grade. That, I'm afraid, is the world as it is. And as much as I don't like the fact that so much emphasis falls upon one single exam result, that is the way things are. However, an interview does give us another way in which we can assess you. So, for instance, if you do your DSE and your final DSE mark is what it is, it might not be astronomically good. I might look at that mark and I might think, that's not great. That person actually interviewed extremely well. I might perhaps also look at your specific mark for English in the DSE, and you might have got a 5-star star. Whoa, that's fantastic. 5-star star for English, interviews extremely well. Maybe this candidate would be a much better fit for our department than their overall DSE score might suggest. That's why the interview is important. And that's how we use it in the way that we assess candidates. It's another way in which we can, if you like, assess you, another way in which we can know you. The interview also, obviously, allows us to assess candidates in a way that an exam never could. And I'll return to that third criteria. And it's a question that I very often find myself asking as I'm interviewing candidates. And that is, would I want this student in my class for the next 4 years? An exam mark is not really going to give me an answer to that question. It's a very difficult question, actually, to determine an answer to, especially in a 20-minute interview. Because in some sense in this question, we're not simply trying to determine how good or how suitable a candidate is now. We're also trying to determine how a candidate might grow. Now, there are all sorts of students that we accept into our departments who might be average students in their first year, but by their 4th year, they might be some of the best students that we have ever taught. And it's actually wonderful as teachers to see students go on that journey. One of the things that in our interviews we're trying to assess is a candidate's capacity for growth. Now, how do we do that? The first thing to say about that is it's really difficult. It's very difficult. The second thing to say, though, is that there are various ways that we can intimate a candidate's capacity for growth. Exactly. We're gauging potential. Exactly. Are they personable? That's really important. Are they interested in our department? Do they seem to be interested in the kinds of things that we offer in our department? Now, one of the ways in which we can gauge something like interest is in gauging how well they are responding to our questions. If we're asking a question and they're not really answering it, then that gives us the sense that, well, are they all that teachable? Are they going to easily and willingly learn from us if they can't, or if they're unwilling to answer questions? But someone who, when asked a question, gets it and off they go, that's the sort of candidate that we want. Are they teachable in some sense is the criterion that we're trying to assess here. And that's not something that we can get from an exam mark. Now, in a moment, I'm going to talk more specifically about questions and the kinds of questions that you might expect. But let me sort of stick with the interview per se for the time being. The interview is not only an opportunity for us to get to know you, it's also in some sense an opportunity for you to know us. And as I often like to say in the interviews themselves, the interview is a two-way thing. You're kind of interviewing us as well. And in some sense, what we're doing now is, in a way, you're interviewing me. I'm, if you like, I'm an open window on the department. I'm giving you a sense of what we're like as a department. I kind of hope I'm giving a sense that our department is open-minded. I hope I'm giving a sense of reassurance. I hope I'm giving a sense that as a department we're reasonable, we're personable. But nevertheless, the interview is a really good opportunity for you to get to know us. Now, generally in the interviews, there will be some time for you to ask questions of us. Given the online interviews, which will be the situation this year, there might not be all that much time for questions for us. And so it's all the more important that if you have any questions, you email me. And I will do one of two things. I will email you back with an answer, or I will answer your question on one of my two talks on Tuesday. Okay. So, third part, question number 3. What can you expect from the interviewer, at least in the CUHK English interviews? Fundamentally, and this is really important for you to keep in mind, fundamentally, the interviewer wants you to do well. There are no trick questions. There'll be no attempts to catch you out. There'll be no attempts to make you look dumb. The interviewer wants you to do well. And even though you might not feel it in the moment, you might be a bit nervous, you might be a bit anxious, even though you might not feel it, every question that the interviewer will ask you is an attempt to make you look better. Now, the reason why I really want to assure you of that is because I think there is a sense, certainly in interviews, maybe specifically in Hong Kong, this has certainly been my experience, that candidates really fear making a mistake. What happens if I say the wrong thing? What happens if I say a thing that somehow offends them or that startles them? Try not to have that fear. If you're driven by that fear, candidates very often fall into the error of almost looking robotic. They almost feel, I don't want to make a mistake, so I won't say anything in the slightest bit sort of interesting. No. Don't worry about making a mistake. Articulate your view. There will be no attempt to make you look dumb, no attempt to trick you. Every single question is, if you like, an invitation for you to show yourself, for you to show what you know, and for you to show what your view is. Provide as much as you can a full answer to the questions that you're asked. So none of the questions that you're asked generally will be simple one-word answer questions. So do provide a full answer to the question. Now, if your answer goes for on and on and on, please don't be offended if an interviewer says, stop, that's enough, we need to go on. Please don't be offended. We are under quite severe time constraints. Be focused, do answer the question, but do give a full answer to the question. The interviewers themselves will be, well, it's not so much a more positive marking scheme so much as every single question will be an attempt to make you or allow you to look your best, if I can put it that way. The interviewers will be very experienced. They will all be professors in our department. They've interviewed hundreds, thousands of candidates before. They know the DSE syllabi, curricula. They know the syllabi of other international curricula. Perhaps above all, when it comes to the interviewers, do trust that they will see the good in you. Do trust that they will see the good in you. Now, one of the anxieties that I've often had when I've been interviewed is I don't think they've seen the good in me. To a certain extent, trust your interviewer that they will. Fourth question. What will the actual interview be like? What will the interview be like? Firstly, foremostly, it will be online on Zoom. Now, I apologize for those of you who don't like the Zoom platform. We have no choice as regards that. From my experience, we are all used at the university to the Zoom platform. That's the one that we use. It will be on Zoom. When you're being interviewed, it's obviously extremely important for you to have your cameras on. Now, I think you all assume that and you know that. But given that we're trying to assess you and how you respond to our questions, seeing you rather than just hearing you is extremely important. So please have your cameras on. Online communication. Now, I am somewhat hesitant to give specific advice on online communication since I am really new to it myself. I've had a semester of teaching online, but still I feel very much like a novice. I'm still beginning. However, if I can offer very non-prescriptively and very tentatively some advice, it would be this. And this is obvious, I'm sure, to you. Speak clearly. Speak clearly. Speak perhaps a little bit more loudly than you otherwise would. And perhaps in terms of your facial expressions, in terms of your gestures, I don't know if you use gestures, whether you're accustomed to using gestures. I guess I'm more animated with my gestures. But do be animated in your facial expressions. Obviously, don't be over the top. Don't be anyone who you are not. If you're not normally animated in your face, then don't be. But be energized, be lively. In my experience of teaching this semester, and you all have learnt, and perhaps some of you have taught through online means, and so you would perhaps have an experience of this. But my experience of teaching online is that I found it so much more exhausting than teaching in person. And I've been reflecting to myself, and indeed, I'll talk about dress in a moment. My own experience, and I've reflected upon this with my students, about why online communication is so much more tiring, is in some sense, in face-to-face communication, if I can put it this way, the gap through which we can present our data, through which we can communicate our information, is much wider. In online communication, It's as if the hole through which we need to communicate is so much smaller. It's a bit like if you can imagine toothpaste. So the hole at the end of a toothpaste tube, imagine that hole was shrunk to a tiny pinprick. How much energy it would take to squeeze the toothpaste out. In some sense, online communication shrinks that hole down to something so much smaller than what we're used to. And we need to be a little bit more energized, a little bit more animated to communicate ourselves to each other. So if I can offer any kind of advice about online communication, it would be that. Do be energized, be animated, but don't be not yourself. Above all, be yourself. Be comfortable, be at ease. More technically, with the interview itself, we will be interviewing 5 candidates at a time. Now, this is hardly ideal, but I'm afraid that's the practicality of interviewing so many people in a very short space of time. Candidates will be asked 2 questions. There might be some time at the end of the interview for you to ask us questions. Now, when it comes to these questions, the fundamental rule to follow, and this is a rule that is obvious to all of you, but nevertheless it's a rule which many do not follow, and that is, listen to the question, answer the question. I previously said that we are in these interviews doing our best to determine whether a candidate will be happily and willingly receptive to our teaching. Now, the first sign that a candidate might be happily and willingly receptive to our teaching is whether they can answer a question. If they can answer a question, if they can, as it were, comprehend our question and respond to it, then immediately I'm interested. Here is someone who listens. Here is someone who can respond. In some sense, the interviews that I try to conduct, and I think this is broadly the case with all of our interviewers, is we like the interviews that are most like a conversation. Now, in a way, an interview is a very artificial form of conversation. But it is a meaningful conversation insofar as it is a responsive thing. A question is asked, and that question is responded to. In some sense, an interview is all about the interviewee's capacity to respond. And that is why, for me, prepared answers never really work, because prepared answers get in the way of a meaningful response to a question. The interview will not be in the form of a group discussion. There will be 2 questions, and you will be asked these 2 questions separately. Okay, so I hope that clarifies things for you. So fundamentally, it will sort of be a one-on-one question. I hope, Ronnie, that answers your question. We're after meaningful sort of responses to our questions. Crucial, obviously, to responding well is listening. Now, one of the things that has occurred several times in the past is that I have asked a question and a candidate will have launched into a prepared answer, perhaps a self-introduction. And I would feel, well, that's not what I asked for. So do listen to the question. One common question that I'm sure a lot of interviewees have is, what if I do not know the answer to the question? Well, let me reassure you that the sort of questions that generally we ask in our interviews are less based on knowledge than they are attempts to gather your view, in some sense your opinion, your thoughtful reflection on something. So for all of our questions, you do have an answer. Somewhere in there, you have an answer. And we want to somehow extract that answer. So generally, the questions that we ask, you're not going to be stuck. I don't know the answer. You do know the answer. The trick is trying to access that. However, in some interviews, you might be asked questions that are more fact-based, more knowledge-based. Now, the sort of advice that I can give for those kinds of questions, firstly, don't make any claims about yourself, about what you know, for instance, that aren't true. Now, sometimes this is of relevance to the kinds of interviews that we do. Now, a question that sometimes is asked in our interviews is we might ask a candidate to talk about something that they have read, that they are especially interested in. And sometimes a candidate will say that they have read, that they really loved a novel. Now, don't say that you really love a novel if you haven't read that novel. So don't make any claims for yourself about what you know, about what you've read that aren't true. If you're struck with a question and it's a more fact-based question and you don't have the facts, then try to base your answer on what you do know. And perhaps finally, if you're asked a question and you're uncertain of the knowledge basis of your answer, handle your answer with humility. Do so with openness. In my view, one of the great skills that we can all learn is how to navigate those moments when we're called to make a comment on something that we ourselves are not expert on. How do we navigate those moments? How do we handle those moments? With discretion, with sensitivity, and with humility, and in full acknowledgement that we ourselves do not have the full answer. Now, I think in the manner in which you respond to a question whose answer you might not fully know, in the manner you respond to this question, you can still impress an interviewer. You may also get follow-up questions to your answer. Now, it strikes me that it is a misconception that interviewees treat follow-up questions almost like interrogation. They are not. They are not. We often ask follow-up questions because we're genuinely interested in what you're saying. Another reason why we might ask a follow-up question is that I might feel that a particular candidate is good, but they're not showing themselves as good as they are. And I ask a follow-up question actually to access the good that's in them, but that's not as visible. So follow-up questions are not attempts to interrogate you. They're not attempts to try to catch you out, to make you look dumb. They are substantially an attempt to make you look even better than perhaps you are. Very often, whether you're interviewing for a department at university or perhaps for a workplace, an institution will ask you questions which require you, and this is something that is knowledge-based, which is fact-based, questions which require you to have some understanding of the particular institution, whether it's a company or a department or whatever. So a typical question rather for a job interview is, what can you contribute to our company? What can you contribute to our workplace? And that question requires you to have some understanding of what this workplace is about. Now, I'm not going to tell you the questions that we are going to ask you in our interviews, partly because I don't know yet, and partly because it will change depending on the interviewer and the interviewee. But what I will say is, do have some understanding of our department. Another question that we often get is, how formal should I be? My overall answer is, well, fundamentally be yourself, use your own judgment. My secondary answer would be, err on the side of formality. Err on the side of formality. But also respond to the cues that an interviewer might give you. So, for instance, one of the things that I sometimes like to do in an interview is I will joke around a little bit. I want my interviewees to laugh a little bit. I want them to loosen up. I want them to feel at ease. And that's a kind of a cue to interviewees to be a little less formal. If an interviewer is giving off those cues, then respond accordingly. Another question that we often get is, what attitude, as it were, should I adopt in the interview? Should I be very confident? Should I want to project that sense of myself? Or should perhaps I be more humble, more modest, perhaps? Again, don't be anything that you're not. Don't be anything that you're not. That's extremely important. Don't be anything that you're not, because we're trying to interview you, not someone else who you might pretend to be. And secondly, it's often very obvious when someone is trying to be someone that they're not. It often doesn't come across very well. You are the best person that you can possibly be in an interview, I guess is what I'm saying. The second way that I would respond to this question is, although I perfectly understand why someone would ask, should I be confident? Should I be humble? What image of myself should I project? In some sense, this is the wrong sort of question to be asking. It's the wrong sort of attitude, it's the wrong frame of mind to take into an interview. The sort of frame of mind that I think one should take in interview is the sort of frame of mind that what I have said, I hope so far, has been articulating. And that is, how can I respond well to the questions? How can I give the best version of myself? Not how can I be A or B, but how can I respond in the moment to the questions that are put to me? The final one of my 5 questions, and I realize I've gone for longer than I thought, so I apologize for that. Exactly, Ronnie. I mean, the key is to be genuine. Of course, being genuine is one of the most difficult things. I'll come to that at the end. The 5th question that I wanted to articulate is, what might the interviewer expect from you? 2 things that an interviewer, I think, can justifiably expect from you. Some knowledge of the program. I've already said something about this. Some knowledge of what the program offers, some knowledge if you're going perhaps to a job interview, some knowledge of the company, some knowledge of the workplace, some knowledge of what this particular organization is about. What are its strengths? How can you contribute to a company's strengths? And so for us, we, I think, expect and justifiably expect our candidates to have some knowledge of our department. Now, this also means that candidates have some knowledge of the very basic structure of a university and a university degree. It requires candidates to know, for instance, the difference between a department and a faculty. If you're not clear on that distinction, then do get clear on that distinction. Go to the CU website. Now, the reason why I say that is because a question that we very often ask our candidates is there any course in our department that you would especially be interested to take? And we get some wild and wonderful answers to that questions. One of the most memorable answers that I remember, memorable in the bad way, answers that I remember getting to that question is, I asked a candidate, is there a particular course that we offer in our department that you would be keen to take? And they said, Japanese. Now, I sort of had to pause for a moment and wonder, do we offer Japanese in our Department of English? Well, of course we don't. Of course we don't. Now, that showed me that that particular candidate didn't really understand what a department was, and perhaps that individual didn't really look at our website to know what we as a department offered him or her. So do have some understanding of what we offer. It's also, and this is a big clue, an important piece of advice. I said right at the beginning that one of the things that we're trying to assess is how interested a candidate is in what we offer. Now, if I ask a candidate what course would especially interest you in our department, and they have no answer, what does that tell me about that candidate's interest in us? Right? Secondly, I think an interviewer can expect from you some kind of understanding of the skills and the knowledge that you will acquire as an English major. I don't know, Ho Lun. I don't know. It's a mystery to me. It's a mystery. Yeah, Japanese. But I did have to catch myself. I did have to think, do we offer a course in English on Japanese literature? Perhaps English translation? No, we don't. We don't. Anyway, I think an interviewer can expect you to understand the kinds of skills that you will acquire in our department, and also perhaps to have some understanding of how those skills might be useful to you in your future career. Now, of course, we know that at your age, you probably don't fully know what you want to do. That's perfectly normal. That's perfectly natural. But at the same time, we'd like to hear from you about how the skills that you acquire with us might be of use to you later on. I think that's something that we can genuinely, as interviewers, expect from you in our department. Another question that we often get associated with what can an interviewer expect from you is to do with, and someone has already asked this question, to do with dress. Now, I am always, at all times, reluctant to give fashion advice. And goodness knows you can get away with a lot, through online communication. I think one of my students in a lecture the other day was wearing their pajamas, and they were sort of wearing a cardigan over the top. Fundamentally, I don't wear pajamas, please. Do have standards. Have standards. Dignity, personal dignity is important. Err on the side, once again, of formality. But at the same time, I do want to reassure you that your dress is not what we're going to remember you by. If you walked into an interview room wearing shorts and a t-shirt and flip-flops, I might initially think, well, that's a bit weird. But if I asked you a question, I said, is there something that you've read recently which really interests you? And you launched into an articulate and an intelligent analysis of Hamlet, then I'm not going to be remembering you by your shorts and your t-shirt. So err on the side of formality, but do know that that's not what is important in the end. The final thing that I want to say, and this is how I will conclude, is that ironically enough, so many of these skills that one utilizes in an interview situation are skills that you would acquire as part of an English major. And I know that's a cruel irony. You know, the skills that you acquire in the English major are, in some sense, the skills that you need to get into the English major. But nevertheless, these skills are fundamentally skills of listening, skills of comprehending, and skills of responding. Essentially, these are skills of communicating. To a large extent, I think this word communication is overused. And we have at times an over-technical understanding of what communication is. I like to think of communication as being no more and certainly no less than the art of making contact with another person. How can you understand another person? How can you make yourself understood to another person? Making contact. That's what we're trying to do substantially in an interview. I'm trying to make contact with you, and I am trying as an interviewer to give you the opportunity to make contact with me. The art of making contact involves skills, involves techniques that you will learn as part of an English major. And the interview is just one of many situations in life where you will be called upon to use these skills. And I will end there. I'm sorry that I went for nearly double the time that I thought that I would go for. I'm sorry to have taken so much of your time, but I hope this has been useful for you. And I hope if you do have any questions, that you would feel free to email me, and I would do my best to answer them. Okay. For those of you who are applying to us, I really look forward to seeing you in the interview, and I mean that sincerely. An interview should actually be an enjoyable thing. It should be a conversation, and I certainly hope that it will be for you. Okay, thanks everyone, and I hope to see you soon.